In 1716, a Scottish gambler with a murder warrant on his head walked into the court of France and made an impossible promise. He could save the kingdom without collecting a single tax or mining a single ounce of gold. His name was John Law, and what he proposed wasn't alchemy of metals. It was alchemy of belief. He would turn paper into wealth, debt into prosperity, trust into empire. The king, desperate and bankrupt, agreed. And within 4 years, Law had created something that would outlive empires. The blueprint for every central bank that would ever exist. He didn't invent banking. He invented something far more dangerous. A system where money could be created from nothing, backed not by gold, but by the promise of future wealth that didn't exist yet. It worked brilliantly, until it didn't. And when it collapsed, it took France with it, but left behind the architecture of modern finance. This is the story of the man who created the shadow banks, and the system that still rules us today. Before John Law, money was simple. A coin was metal. Its value was weight. You could hold it, bite it, melt it down. It was real in a way that left no room for doubt. But by the early 1700s, Europe's kingdoms faced a problem. There wasn't enough gold to fund their ambitions. Wars were expensive. Empires demanded resources. And the mines could only produce so much. England had already discovered a workaround. In 1694, they chartered the Bank of England, a private institution, given the power to issue paper notes backed by the Crown's promise. It was the first true central bank. And it worked. France, jealous and bankrupt, wanted the same power. But they lacked England's credibility. Their king had defaulted on debts repeatedly. No one trusted French promises anymore. That's when John Law arrived. An exile, a gambler, a mathematical genius who understood something others didn't. Money wasn't about metal. It was about motion, about circulation, about belief made systematic. John Law was born in Edinburgh in 1671, the son of a goldsmith and banker. From childhood, he lived surrounded by the mechanics of money, ledgers, loans, interest calculations. But unlike his father, who saw banking as a trade, Law saw it as a science waiting to be perfected. By his 20s, he had become a professional gambler, one of the best in Europe, not because of luck, but because he understood probability in ways most men couldn't grasp. He calculated odds, managed risk, and always played the long game. But his luck ran out in 1694, when he killed a man in a duel over a woman, convicted of murder. Sentenced to death, he escaped prison and fled to the continent, a fugitive with nothing but his mind and a dangerous idea. For the next 20 years, Law wandered Europe's gambling halls and royal courts, refining his theory. He wrote treatises on monetary policy that kings ignored and bankers mocked. His central argument was radical. A nation's wealth wasn't determined by how much gold it possessed, but by how much economic activity it could generate. And economic activity, he believed, required abundant money in circulation. Not gold, there would never be enough, but paper currency, issued systematically, backed not by metal but by the productive capacity of the nation itself. Land, resources, labor, future wealth. He called it credit, and he insisted it could be created. Most dismissed him as a madman, but France, drowning in debt from decades of war, was desperate enough to listen. In 1715, King Louis XIV died, leaving his 5-year-old great-grandson as heir. The regent, Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, inherited a catastrophe. The treasury was empty. Creditors were demanding payment. The nobility refused to pay more taxes. France was on the brink of collapse. Law saw his opening. He petitioned the regent with a proposal: allow him to establish a bank that could issue paper currency, and he would revive French commerce without requiring new gold. Philippe, with nothing to lose, agreed. And in 1716, John Law founded the Banque Générale, France's first paper currency bank. The design was elegant. The bank would issue notes redeemable for gold or silver. But crucially, the notes themselves would circulate as money, People could deposit metal and receive paper, pay taxes with paper, conduct trade with paper. And because paper was easier to transport and divide, commerce would accelerate. But here was law's true innovation. The bank didn't need to hold metal equal to all the notes it issued. It only needed enough to satisfy any individual request for redemption. As long as most people kept their wealth in paper, the system would work. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking on a national scale, and it worked spectacularly. Within months, French commerce revived. Paper notes circulated freely. The economy, starved for currency, suddenly had liquidity. Merchants thrived. Tax revenues increased. The regent was thrilled. John Law, the exiled murderer and gambler, had become the most powerful financier in Europe, and he was just getting started. Success made Law bold. If paper currency could revive commerce, what else could it do? In 1717, he launched his masterpiece, the Mississippi Company. Officially, it was a trading venture with exclusive rights to develop France's Louisiana territory in North America. In reality, it was something unprecedented, a hybrid of central bank, investment fund, and colonial enterprise. Law convinced the government to grant the company monopolies on trade with Louisiana, Canada, and the West Indies. Then he absorbed the national tobacco monopoly, then the royal mint, then the collection of taxes. One by one, the most profitable functions of the French state were transferred to a private company controlled by John Law. But the true genius was the financing mechanism. Law issued shares in the Mississippi Company and allowed people to purchase them with government bonds. The nearly worthless paper debts France had accumulated. This did two things simultaneously. It converted France's debt into equity and created a massive new asset that people could buy, sell, and speculate on. The shares, initially priced at 500 livres, began to climb. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. The more they rose, the more people wanted to buy. And the more people bought, the more they rose. It became a mania. Nobles sold estates to buy shares. Servants became millionaires overnight. A new word entered the French language. Millionaire. Someone who owned 1 million livres in Mississippi stock. The Rue Quincampoix, where the shares traded, became a circus. People slept on the street waiting for the market to open. Hunchbacks rented out their backs as writing desks for contracts. Fortunes changed hands hourly. And at the center of it all sat John Law, now the Duke of Arkansas, Controller General of Finances, the most powerful man in France after the regent. He had done the impossible. He had transformed France's crushing debt into apparent prosperity. He had made paper more valuable than gold. He had proven that money was simply organized belief. But there was a problem. A fatal problem that Law himself understood but couldn't solve. The Mississippi Company's actual assets, the land in Louisiana, the trade monopolies, the future profits, were real but modest. The share price, driven by speculation, had climbed to levels disconnected from any underlying value. The shares were worth 10,000 livres each because people believed they would go higher. But what happened when people stopped believing? Law knew the answer. He'd seen it at gambling tables. Once confidence breaks, it breaks completely. So he did the only thing he could. He printed more money, not to buy things, but to buy time, to keep the system liquid enough that people wouldn't demand redemption, to maintain the illusion long enough for the real economy to catch up to the paper wealth. It was the birth of modern central banking, and it was doomed from the start. The first crack appeared in late 1719. Prince de Conde, one of France's wealthiest nobles, had made a fortune in Mississippi shares. But unlike others, he understood the game, and he decided to cash out not just his shares, but his paper currency itself. He arrived at the Banque Générale with 3 wagons and demanded his notes be converted to gold. Law had no choice but to comply. The wagons left filled with metal. Word spread. If a prince was converting to gold, what did he know that others didn't? Others began requesting redemption. Small amounts at first, then floods. The bank's gold reserves, always insufficient, began to drain. Law responded by making redemption illegal. Paper currency was declared the only legal tender. Anyone trying to possess more than 500 livres in gold could be arrested. This worked for a few months, but it revealed the truth. Paper money's value wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was backed by force, by law in the legal sense, by law in the personal sense. In May 1720, Law made his final fatal move. He attempted to stabilize the system by decree. The Mississippi Company's shares and the currency will be devalued gradually and officially to bring them back in line with reality. It was an honest attempt to engineer a soft landing, but it had the opposite effect. If the government itself was admitting the currency was overvalued, why would anyone hold it? The announcement triggered the very panic it was meant to prevent. The market collapsed. Shares in the Mississippi Company, once worth 10,000 livres, plummeted to 500, then 200. The currency, printed in such quantities that Paris was drowning in paper, became nearly worthless. People who had been millionaires weeks earlier were ruined. Suicides multiplied. Riots broke out. The entire French economy, which had briefly seemed revived, collapsed back into crisis. Worse than before, because now trust itself had been destroyed. John Law, the man who had promised infinite wealth, became the most hated person in France. Mobs threatened his life. The regent, desperate to contain the damage, stripped Law of his positions. In December 1720, Law fled Paris in disguise, leaving behind his fortune, his titles, and his grand experiment in ruins. He died 9 years later in Venice, impoverished and forgotten, still insisting his system had been sound, that only the execution had failed. France, traumatized, banned paper currency for decades. The word banque became an insult. An entire generation learned to distrust anything not made of metal. It seemed like Law's experiment had been a complete failure, a cautionary tale about the dangers of financial innovation. But that wasn't quite true. What John Law created didn't die. It metastasized. While France recoiled from paper money, England studied what had happened, and they learned the right lessons. The Bank of England had watched the Mississippi disaster unfold and recognized something crucial. Law's system was sound. What failed was the scale and speed of implementation, combined with speculative excess. But the core principle, that paper currency backed by future economic activity, could expand commerce beyond the limits of gold supply. That principle was correct. So England refined it. They kept fractional reserves modest. They maintained gold convertibility as a psychological anchor. They avoided linking the currency to speculative ventures. They moved slowly, methodically, building trust over decades rather than promising miracles overnight. And it worked. By the mid-18th century, the Bank of England had become the model for how a central bank should operate. Other nations copied it. The United States, after 2 failed attempts, finally established the Federal Reserve in 1913, using similar principles. Today, every major economy operates on Law's fundamental insight. Money is credit. Currency is created by banks issuing loans. The money supply expands and contracts not based on gold discoveries, but on economic activity and policy decisions. We live in Law's world. We just don't call it that. The system he pioneered, where governments charter private banks to create currency, where money is debt brought into existence, where the line between public and private finance blurs. That system is now universal. Central banks everywhere now do what Law proposed. They manage currency supply to influence economic activity. They create money during crises. They accept government debt as backing for currency. They operate on fractional reserves. The difference is sophistication. Modern central banks have learned to move slowly, to communicate carefully, to maintain the illusion of stability, even when creating trillions from nothing. But the core mechanism, the alchemy of turning belief into currency, debt into money, future promises into present power, that remains unchanged. John Law failed spectacularly, but his failure taught the powerful something invaluable, The system works if you're patient, if you build trust gradually, if you make the transformation so slow that people don't notice they're living in a completely different monetary reality. France returned to paper money eventually. They had to. Every nation did. Because law was right. There would never be enough gold to fuel industrial civilization. The only question was how to implement the truth without admitting what it meant. The true revolution John Law created wasn't financial. It was philosophical. Before law, money was a thing, metal with intrinsic value. After law, money became a relationship, a social agreement backed by institutional authority. This shift changed everything. It meant that whoever controlled the institution that issued currency controlled not just commerce, but the very definition of value itself. Kings had ruled through force, armies, laws, physical power. But law showed that a different kind of power was possible. The power to create money itself. This power was subtle. It didn't announce itself. It operated through ledgers and interest rates, through the expansion and contraction of credit. It looked technical, boring, administrative, but it was the ultimate power, because money is a coordinate system of civilization. Change what money is, and you change everything else. This is why central banks are independent from elected governments, why their decisions are made behind closed doors, why their power is rarely discussed in political debates. Because acknowledging what they truly are, institutions that create money and thus shape reality, would make their authority impossible to sustain. Better to keep it technical, boring, hidden in plain sight behind jargon and complexity. John Law understood this. In his writings, he argued explicitly that control of money was control of the nation, that whoever issued currency held power greater than any king. His mistake was being too honest about it, too fast, too obvious. The central bankers who followed learned to be slower, quieter, to exercise their power through suggestion rather than decree, through influence rather than command. Today, when the Federal Reserve creates trillions of dollars, we call it quantitative easing. When the European Central Bank purchases government debt, it's called monetary policy operations. When banks create money through lending, it's called credit expansion. The language is designed to obscure, but the mechanism is the one Law pioneered, creating currency from debt, from future promises, from organized belief. We are all living the shadow of the bank John Law created, the bank that failed, the bank that succeeded. The world is not governed by kings. It's not governed by presidents or parliaments. It's governed by whoever writes the rules of credit, whoever decides what money is, whoever controls a machinery that turns belief into currency and currency into power. John Law discovered this truth. He built the machine, and though he died in exile and disgrace, his machine never stopped running. It just learned to hide better. The man who created the shadow banks failed, but his shadows never left. They grew longer, darker, more sophisticated, until they became the very architecture of modern power, invisible, essential, and everywhere. Every time you use a credit card, you're invoking law's system. Every time a government responds to crisis by printing money, they're following his blueprint. Every time a central bank adjusts interest rates to influence human behavior, they're practicing the alchemy he pioneered. The experiment never ended. It just became too big to see. If this revelation unsettled you, you're beginning to see what others choose to ignore. Subscribe to follow the spiral deeper. Each story reveals another layer of the machine that shapes our world. Like this if you understand that money was never what they taught you it was. Comment with your thoughts. Serious discourse rewards those who dare to look. Share this with someone ready to question the foundation. Not everyone can handle the weight of what's real. The archive grows, and those who witness early shape what comes next. The man who created the shadow banks taught us something they hope we forget. The rules of money are written by men, and what men write, men can rewrite.